The air still carried the echo of his words, sharp, precise, and venomous in their certainty, the kind of tone used not to argue, but to end. The city outside blinked with indifferent lights, each one a witness to the quiet unraveling inside her chest. Her phone screen dimmed with the final message. You'll see how hard the world gets without me. Somewhere in the hum of traffic, a promise broke. She wanted to scream, but only silence came. That heavy, suffocating silence that makes even breathing sound like defiance. She packed her life into 2 boxes, her resignation letter lying like a death certificate on the desk. Somewhere between the elevator's descent and the lobby's echo, something inside her shifted. Not yet strength, just the faint outline of what might become it. Morning came without color. The sky hung in that dull metallic hue that promises rain but never delivers it, like grief that lingers but refuses to break. She sat at a cafe table, job listings open, untouched coffee cooling beside her. The barista's chatter, the clink of cups, it all sounded too alive for how still she felt inside. Her reflection in the laptop screen looked unfamiliar, foreign even. This was the first day she would not belong anywhere. Not to a man, not to a company, not even to an identity that once defined her worth. And yet, beneath the quiet ache, a thought stirred. If everything she was had been taken, perhaps everything she could be was waiting to begin. By afternoon, she had checked her phone a dozen times. For work offers, for apologies, for something that would stitch the world back into place. None came. The city hummed around her, oblivious. Every buzz of a message turned out to be a discount code. Every call a wrong number. The silence from the one voice she had depended on grew louder than any sound she could bear. But in that silence, a strange realization began to form. That maybe it wasn't absence she feared, but freedom she didn't yet understand. That night, she opened her laptop not to search for jobs, but to calculate survival. Rent, groceries, the last of her severance. The numbers mocked her, neat rows of limitation disguised as logic. But the farther she scrolled, the calmer she became. Her hands stopped trembling. Somewhere between balance sheets and overdue bills, her eyes caught on a name. The company that had fired her, now publicly listing shares at a record low. The irony bit like frost. She whispered the name aloud, not in anger, but as if testing the taste of destiny. It started with one share, then another. Each click was a pulse, each purchase a heartbeat reborn. She didn't know yet that this was the first step toward an empire. She only knew it felt like breathing after drowning. The city lights outside her window flickered in rhythm with her screen. 2 silent witnesses to a woman rebuilding herself pixel by pixel, decision by decision. Somewhere far above the noise of it all, thunder rumbled like applause for the brave. The days blended into one another, a pattern of late nights, coffee stains, and endless research. She studied markets like a woman decoding scripture, every stock movement a sermon in survival. Gone was the fear of failing. What replaced it was colder, sharper, the refusal to be forgotten. While the world moved on, she became invisible by choice, learning the language of power, spoken only in numbers. It wasn't glamour, not yet. It was grit. A kind of grace found only in solitude. The city beyond her window pulsed with neon and indifference. But inside, she was becoming something new. Disciplined, deliberate, dangerous. Weeks later, she almost didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. The dark circles had faded, the hesitation in her jawline replaced by a quiet authority. The mirror no longer showed the one who begged to belong. It showed the one who built without permission. She didn't smile. She nodded to herself, as if acknowledging a co-conspirator. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was recovering. She felt like she was preparing. It was at a crowded networking event that fate disguised itself in conversation. A man, late 50s, with the poise of someone who had lost and rebuilt twice over, noticed her questions, not her charm. He didn't offer comfort. He offered challenge. Over half-empty glasses of wine, they spoke of strategy, timing, patience, all the things she had once confused with weakness. When the evening ended, he handed her his card. "Call me when you're ready to stop surviving and start building," he said. For the first time in months, she felt seen, not as broken, but as beginning. Her apartment became a war room. Charts taped to the walls, plans scribbled across notebooks, headlines circled in red. Every corner of the room whispered purpose. What once felt like desperation had matured into precision. Marcus's words echoed in her mind. Power isn't taken, it's structured. She was no longer chasing redemption. She was architecting control. Every late-night decision, every calculated risk, became another brick in the invisible fortress she was building around her future. When the market dipped, panic spread like smoke through the digital corridors she now haunted. Investors fled. Headlines screamed collapse. But she stayed still. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, breath steady. This was the same kind of storm that had once drowned her. She let it sharpen her. She bought when others sold, trusted data when emotion screamed otherwise. Hours later, her gamble paid. Modestly, but enough to whisper one truth. She was ready. The world just didn't know it yet. The sound of trading floors was the same. The rush of voices, the echo of greed, the perfume of fear disguised as confidence. She walked through it now, not as a ghost of her past, but as its haunting. The badge she wore bore a new company's name. A consultancy she had helped grow quietly through strategy and persistence. No one recognized her at first, and that suited her. The world that had once burned her alive didn't even know she had learned to control the fire. Marcus introduced her to the others. A discreet network of investors who thrived in the spaces between legality and genius. They aren't friends. They were architects of advantage. Evelyn spoke little but listened well, mapping each ego, each motive. Her intellect didn't announce itself. It unfolded, quiet precision cutting through their bravado. When she finally spoke, her plan was simple, surgical, and chillingly effective. Buy back what had discarded her. The table fell silent, and in that silence, power shifted, subtly, irrevocably. Weeks later, her proposal went through under another name, a quiet acquisition group she had built from fragments of trust and borrowed faith. No one connected it to her. Watching the press release go live, she felt an odd calm instead of triumph. Her fingerprints were on the deal, invisible yet undeniable. The company she once served was no longer untouchable. For the first time, the balance of fate felt negotiable. She closed her laptop and smiled. Not with joy, but with understanding. Winning was never about being seen. It was about knowing when to remain unseen. Her name began to circulate again. Not in headlines, but in whispers. A strategist with uncanny timing, they said. A woman who sees the fall before it happens. She let the rumors breathe. She knew the art of letting myth build credibility faster than proof. With every silent meeting, every calculated pause, she climbed further from the ashes of her old life. Still, late at night, she sometimes heard his voice, the one that said she wouldn't survive. Now it came not as pain, but as fuel. The day she signed the first controlling stake in the company that once fired her, the pen didn't shake. It felt almost ceremonial, a rewriting of history without spectacle. Yet power comes with shadows, and she could feel Marcus's gaze sharpen. His mentorship had turned into curiosity, then suspicion. He sensed something in her rise, a plan larger than he'd foreseen. But Evelyn no longer needed him to validate her ambition. The student had outgrown the architect. The ink dried, and with it, the last remnant of who she used to be. Success never announces itself quietly for long. Headlines began circling the mysterious investor reshaping old markets. Anonymous features speculated, analysts obsessed, and one morning her face, blurred but unmistakable, surfaced online beside the company's logo. She stared at the article as if reading her own obituary, rewritten in gold ink. The anonymity she had built with precision was slipping. Outside, the city seemed louder, closer, almost aware of her secret. For the first time in months, she felt fear again. Not of losing everything, but of being seen before she was ready to rule. The message arrived at midnight, a simple line that froze her blood. "Congratulations. I always knew you'd crawl back up." It was him. The voice she had buried in ambition. He had found her through success, not apology. Old memories surfaced like bruises. His smirk in the boardroom, his dismissal, the way he'd made survival sound like an insult. She wanted to delete the message, pretend it was nothing. But her hands wouldn't move, because part of her wanted him to know. Part of her wanted him to see what he'd created. They met again in the one place she had sworn never to return. The lobby of the company that once erased her. The same marble floors, the same chill in the air. He looked almost unchanged. Expensive suit, practiced confidence, the faint smile of a man who still believed the world bent toward him. But this time, she didn't shrink beneath it. She stood taller, her silence heavier than any insult. When he asked if she'd come to gloat, she simply said, "I came to collect." And for the first time, it was his expression that faltered. Power came with noise now. Meetings, headlines, alliances that whispered betrayal between smiles. Marcus had grown restless, watching her take control with unnerving precision. He began to question her motives, her ethics, even her humanity. She saw it in his eyes, that quiet fear men feel when women stop needing them. Their arguments no longer sounded like mentorship. They sounded like prophecy. "You're building something that will destroy you," he warned. "Only if I let it," she replied. The leak came from somewhere close. Confidential documents, her holdings exposed, her connection to the acquisition unveiled. Overnight, admiration turned to scrutiny, whispers to scandal. Her empire trembled on the edge of collapse, and she knew only one of two men could have pulled the thread: the mentor or the ghost. Either way, trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. As the storm outside cracked open the sky, she stood at her window, watching lightning carve through the skyline, realizing this was what true power demanded: solitude. The news cycle spun like a storm, but she didn't flinch. While analysts speculated and investors panicked, Evelyn moved with surgical calm. She turned off her phone, cut her public accounts, and retreated into the quiet, that dangerous silence where plans take form. On her desk lay two files. One marked Hale, the other Rains, the mentor and the betrayer. One had to be neutralized, the other destroyed. Yet beneath the precision of her anger lay something else: sorrow. Because in the process of proving she could survive without anyone, she'd forgotten what peace ever felt like. She struck first. Her lawyers released documents exposing Marcus's offshore accounts, not illegal, but questionable enough to ruin trust. Within hours, his influence evaporated. He called her furious, betrayed, begging to know why. She didn't answer. Because the truth was too cruel. He had taught her this. Every move he once used to dominate had become her weapon. The student didn't just surpass the mentor. She dismantled him. When she finally picked up his last call, she said only, "You said power is structured. I just rearranged it." Daniel's turn came not with fury, but finesse. She invited him to dinner under the pretense of reconciliation, choosing the same rooftop where he once ended their relationship. He arrived charming, smug, unchanged. The city glittered beneath them, a mirror of their shared history, fractured but still burning. When she revealed her ownership, the color drained from his face. He tried to recover with laughter, but her silence devoured the moment. "You said I couldn't survive without you," she murmured, raising her glass. "Turns out, I only needed to lose you to remember how." But wars always consume their victors. The board began to fracture beneath her. Investigations, audits, accusations of manipulation. Her allies fled. Her fortune froze. The company she now controlled was bleeding under the weight of her conquest. Yet she felt no panic, only inevitability. Empires, like people, were not meant to last. They were meant to prove. In the ashes of exposure, she found herself smiling, because the worst had already happened long ago. She had been destroyed once and rebuilt. Everything after that was practice. She sold everything, liquidated the assets, transferred the profits into anonymous trusts, and walked away before anyone could stop her. It wasn't defeat, it was release. When Marcus and Daniel turned on each other in public scandal, she was already gone, a ghost among the powerful, invisible once again by choice. Standing at the airport gate, she looked out at the runway lights and exhaled. The war was over. Not because she'd won, but because she'd learned the secret of survival. Victory isn't power. It's freedom. The sea spoke a language she hadn't heard in years. Something slower, older, and indifferent. She had traded the noise of the city for the whisper of tides, rented a cottage where no one knew her name. Mornings came with salt air and stillness, not headlines. She no longer checked stock prices or messages. There was nothing left to control. Sometimes she would watch fishermen mend their nets and wonder when life had last felt that honest. Every empire ends, she thought, but maybe that's what makes it beautiful. Its impermanence. She wrote to Marcus first, then to Daniel. Letters never sent, not apologies, not explanations, just truth. To Marcus, she wrote of gratitude and grief, of learning strength through his ambition. To Daniel, she wrote of the cost of cruelty, and how pain can build palaces if you're willing to burn yourself for the foundation. When she folded the pages, her hands no longer shook. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't for them. It was the permission to stop rewriting the past. Months passed before the knock came, unexpected, hesitant. Marcus stood at her door, older somehow, wearier. His empire had crumbled in her absence. He didn't come for revenge, only understanding. They shared tea in silence, two soldiers of ambition who had outlived their own wars. "You were right," he said finally. "Power is structure. But you taught me it can also be ruin." She smiled faintly. "And ruin can be the first honest thing we ever build." When he left, she didn't feel triumph. She felt closure. One morning she caught her reflection in the mirror. Not the strategist, not the survivor. Just a woman with salt in her hair and peace on her face. The mirror that once judged her now simply witnessed her. She thought of the elevator reflection from that first night. The hollow stare of someone unsure she'd endure. That woman was gone, but her ghost had stayed long enough to guide her here. Evelyn smiled. Not out of pride, but recognition. She had finally met herself without needing to prove she existed. On the last evening of winter, she walked the shoreline until the light dissolved into sea and sky. The tide reached her ankles, cold, grounding. She no longer felt the need to rebuild or prove. The world she'd once conquered continued without her, and that was enough. Somewhere, another storm was brewing, another Evelyn beginning her own climb, unaware of the peace that waits after the war. She whispered a silent wish for her, then turned toward the horizon, carrying nothing but her name. And this time, it was enough. The letter arrived on plain stationery, addressed simply, Evelyn Carter, founder Carter Holdings. She hadn't used that name in months. A women's business summit wanted her to speak on resilience. For hours she stared at the invitation, unsure if the world she'd left behind deserved her voice. But then she thought of the women still trapped under the weight of someone else's permission. She had once been one of them. She folded the letter, smiled, and whispered, "All right." The auditorium lights glared like judgment. Rows of faces, curious, expectant, waited. Evelyn stepped onto the stage in a white suit, calm and unadorned. She didn't talk about profit or conquest. She spoke of loss, silence, rebuilding, and the brutal grace of starting over. Every word came not as confession, but as release. When she finished, the applause wasn't thunderous. It was steady, reverent, real. She realized then that success had never been about being remembered. It was about being useful. After the talk, as the crowd dispersed, she noticed a woman lingering by the exit, young, nervous, clutching a worn briefcase. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Evelyn saw her own reflection from years ago. Uncertainty draped in quiet hope. The woman approached and whispered, "They said I couldn't make it without him." Evelyn smiled gently, placing a hand on her shoulder, then proved them right by surviving better. The woman laughed through tears, and Evelyn felt the circle complete. That night, Evelyn returned to her hotel overlooking the same skyline where it had all begun. The city had changed, or maybe she had. She opened the window, breathing in the pulse of neon and night air, no longer haunted by it. On the glass, her reflection shimmered against the horizon, layered with the woman she had once been. Fragile, furious, afraid. "You made it," she whispered to that ghost. But it was never about survival. It was about living. And for the first time, the reflection smiled back. Dawn came quietly, pale gold seeping across the skyline she once owned. Evelyn packed a single bag, no contracts, no trophies, just a journal and a promise. She would build again, not from anger, but from purpose. Her name no longer felt like armor. It felt like truth. As the sun rose, she walked through the streets, unseen and free, the sound of the city folding around her like applause. Somewhere deep within, the last ember of her old fire glowed. Not for destruction this time, but for light.